That night at the Los Angeles Charity Gala, a woman stole Julia Roberts' seat. 5 minutes later, everyone would forget the woman's name. But no one would ever forget what Julia did. The Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. November 2019. A benefit for children's hospitals. Black tie. Red carpet. The kind of evening where power and wealth gather under crystal chandeliers and pretend, for a few hours, that writing checks equals caring. Julia Roberts arrived quietly. No entourage. No publicist whispering in her ear. Just Julia, in a charcoal evening gown that cost less than most of the jewelry in the room, walking through the lobby with the same calm she'd carried for 30 years in this business. She'd been doing these events since she was 23. She knew the rhythm. The photographers at the entrance. The donor reception. The seated dinner where people paid $50,000 to eat rubber chicken and feel important. Then the program. Speeches, video tributes, the inevitable moment when someone cried on stage and everyone reached for their checkbooks. Julia had her seat assignment in her hand. A small cream card with elegant calligraphy, row E, seat 7. Orchestra level. She'd specifically requested not to be at the VIP tables up front. Those tables were for people who needed to be seen. Julia just wanted to watch, contribute, and leave. She entered the theater. The house lights were still up. People milled in the aisles, greeting each other with air kisses and comparing donation levels. The seats were plush burgundy velvet, the kind that had absorbed decades of applause and tears and whispered conversations. Row E. She walked down the aisle, counting seats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There was a woman sitting in her seat. Not just sitting. Settled. Fur wrap draped over the back of the chair. Diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light. Champagne glass on the armrest. The posture of someone who had claimed territory and intended to keep it. Julia stopped in the aisle. She looked at her card again. Row E, seat 7. She looked at the small brass number on the seat's armrest. 7. Excuse me, Julia said, her voice quiet, polite. I think there's been a mistake. This is my seat. The woman looked up. Mid-50s. Perfectly styled hair that hadn't moved in 3 hours. A dress that screamed expense but whispered nothing about taste. Eyes that assessed Julia in one sweep. The simple gown, the minimal jewelry, the lack of obvious wealth signals, and dismissed her. I don't think so, the woman said, turning back to her conversation with the man beside her. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. Julia held up her seat card. I have the assignment right here. Row E, seat 7. The woman didn't even look at the card. Well, there must be some confusion with the event staff. You'll need to sort it out with them. I'm not moving. The man beside her, husband, probably, with the same expression of casual entitlement, added without looking up from his phone. There are plenty of empty seats. I'm sure you can find somewhere else. Julia didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Something shifted in the air. Not dramatic. Not obvious. But the 3 people in the seats directly behind them stopped talking. A woman across the aisle turned to watch. The kind of attention that gathers when people sense a moment forming. Julia stood very still. She didn't argue. Didn't repeat herself. Didn't summon the authority of her name or her career or the fact that she'd probably contributed more to this charity in the past decade than everyone in this row combined. She just looked at the woman. A long, quiet look. The kind of look that sees everything. The desperation to be important, the need to take what isn't yours because giving isn't enough, the small cruelty of someone who mistakes rudeness for power. I see, Julia said finally. Just those 2 words. Calm. Clear. She turned and walked back up the aisle. The woman smirked. Adjusted her fur. Took a sip of champagne. Leaned to her husband and whispered something that made him chuckle. Victory. She'd won. She'd held her ground against some woman who probably couldn't even afford these ticket prices anyway. What the woman didn't know What she couldn't have known because she'd been too busy asserting dominance to actually look at who she was speaking to, was that she just made the worst decision of her evening. Away from the cameras, Julia made a choice no one expected. Julia found an usher near the theater entrance. A young woman, probably 22, wearing the standard black vest and anxious expression of someone working their first major event. "Hi," Julia said, with the same gentle warmth she'd used a moment ago. "I have a small seating situation. Could you help me?" The usher looked up, recognized her, and went pale. "Oh my God! Ms. Roberts." "Yes. Of course. What's wrong?" "Someone's in my assigned seat. Row E, seat 7. I have my card here." Julia showed her. "I don't want to make a scene, but I'd love to understand what we should do." The usher checked her tablet, scrolling frantically. "Row E, seat 7 is definitely assigned to you. Let me get the house manager. We'll clear this up immediately." "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," Julia said, touching the young woman's arm lightly. "Take your time. I'll wait here." 3 minutes later, the house manager arrived. A woman in her 40s who'd been managing events at this venue for 15 years and had seen every variety of seating dispute imaginable. She took one look at Julia's card, one look at her tablet, and her expression hardened. "Ms. Roberts, I apologize. This is unacceptable. Let me handle this." They walked back down the aisle together. The house lights were starting to dim. The program would begin in 5 minutes. More people had taken their seats. Rowie was now fully occupied except for the seat Julia should have been in. The house manager stopped at row E, seat 7. The woman was still there, now chatting animatedly with someone in the row ahead, her laugh too loud, her gestures too broad. "Excuse me," the house manager said, her voice professional but firm. "Ma'am, I need to see your seat assignment." The woman turned, annoyed at being interrupted. "What?" "Your seat assignment card, please. There's been a report that you may be in the wrong seat." The woman's face flushed. "I most certainly am not. I paid $15,000 for this seat." "Then you'll have your assignment card to prove it." A pause. The woman glanced at her husband, who was suddenly very interested in his phone. She fumbled in her small clutched purse, pulled out a card, handed it over with a triumphant expression. The house manager looked at it, looked at the seat number, looked back at the woman. "Ma'am, this card says row F, seat 12. You're in the wrong row entirely." The flush deepened to crimson. "That's impossible. I've been sitting here." "You've been sitting in someone else's assigned seat. I need you to move to your correct seat immediately." "I will not. I'm perfectly comfortable here. If there's a problem with the seating chart, that's not my concern." "The person whose seat this is," the house manager said, her voice dropping to a quieter register that somehow carried more weight, "is standing right here, and has been extraordinarily patient." She stepped aside slightly, revealing Julia, standing quietly in the aisle, holding her seat card, watching with that same calm expression. The woman looked at Julia, really looked at her for the first time. Recognition hit like cold water. The simple charcoal gown wasn't cheap. It was expensive in the way that doesn't need to announce itself. The minimal jewelry wasn't costume, it was real, worn with the ease of someone who owns better pieces at home. The posture wasn't uncertain, it was the natural grace of someone who'd walked red carpets for 3 decades. And the face. That face. Everyone knew that face. Julia Roberts. America's sweetheart. Pretty woman. Erin Brockovich. Oscar winner. Box office queen. Standing in the aisle, waiting for her seat. The seat this woman had stolen. The color drained from the woman's face as fast as it had appeared. "Oh God," she whispered. I didn't realize." Julia still didn't speak. She just stood there, waiting. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. The theater had gone quiet. Not completely. There were still murmured conversations, programs rustling, phones being silenced. But row E and the rows immediately surrounding it had fallen into watchful silence. Everyone was pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. The woman stood up, fumbling, her fur catching on the armrest. Her champagne glass tipping, someone catching it before it spilled. Her husband already gathering their things, his face stony with humiliation. "I'm sorry," the woman said, not looking at Julia. "I didn't know. I thought there was a mistake with the cards and I just..." She trailed off, clutching her purse, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. The house manager gestured toward row F. "Your seats are this way." The couple moved past Julia into the aisle. The woman tried to make eye contact, perhaps hoping for forgiveness, perhaps just hoping Julia would say something that would make this moment less awful. Julia looked at her. The same quiet look from before. Seeing everything. Understanding everything. And then Julia smiled. Not a big smile. Not the famous megawatt grin that had launched 1,000 magazine covers. Just a small, gentle curve of the lips. The smile you give someone when you understand they've learned something they needed to learn. "Enjoy the evening," Julia said softly. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes now, and hurried toward row F with her husband trailing behind her. Julia took her seat. Row E, seat 7. She settled in like she'd been there all along. The house manager leaned down. "I'm so sorry that happened, Ms. Roberts. Can I get you anything? Champagne? Water?" "I'm fine," Julia said. "Thank you for your help." "Of course. And just so you know, we'll be reviewing our seating protocols. This shouldn't have happened." Julia touched the woman's hand. "She made a mistake. We all make mistakes. It's resolved now." The house manager nodded and moved away. The lights dimmed further. The program was about to begin. But Julia wasn't thinking about the program. She was thinking about something that had happened 23 years ago. A different charity event. A different theater. A different version of herself. 1996. She'd been young still. Famous, yes, but young in the way that fame makes you feel invincible. She'd been at a benefit in New York, and there had been a seating confusion, some mix-up with the tables, and she'd found someone in her assigned seat. She'd been less kind about it then. Not cruel. But impatient. Dismissive. She'd said something like, "This is my seat," with an edge that implied, "and you should know who I am." The person had moved immediately, embarrassed and apologetic, and Julia had felt satisfied. Righteous. Important. She'd thought about that moment maybe 3 times in the following years. Brief flashes of shame she'd pushed aside. The kind of small cruelty you tell yourself doesn't matter because it was small. Until her mother died. 2015. Betty Lou Roberts. The woman who'd raised Julia and her siblings in Georgia, who'd worked as a church secretary, who never let fame or money change the fundamental rules she taught her children. Kindness costs nothing. Everyone deserves dignity. Your character is what you do when no one important is watching. At the funeral, a woman approached Julia. Someone from her mother's church. An older woman with kind eyes and worn hands. "Your mother talked about you all the time," the woman said. "Not because you're famous. Because she said you treated everyone the same. The makeup artist. The driver. The person serving coffee. She said that's how she knew she'd raised you right." Julia had cried then. Really cried. Because she knew her mother was wrong. Or had been wrong. Because there had been moments, small moments, forgettable moments, when Julia had let impatience win. When she'd let status matter. When she'd forgotten that everyone deserves dignity. She'd promised herself, standing at her mother's grave, that she would do better. That every interaction would honor what Betty Lou had tried to teach her. Tonight, that woman in the stolen seat had given Julia a choice. She could have used her name like a weapon. She could have let the house manager embarrass the woman publicly. She could have made sure everyone knew what had happened. Instead, she'd chosen kindness. Not because the woman deserved it, but because Julia's mother had taught her that dignity isn't something you earn, it's something you give. The lights went down completely. The program began. Julia sat in row E, seat 7, and watched children from the hospital come on stage to thank the donors. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. After the event, the house manager found Julia in the lobby. That woman came to me during intermission. She wanted me to give you this. It was the woman's donation check. Originally $15,000. Now rewritten for $50,000. And a note. I'm sorry. You showed me who I want to be. Thank you. Julia never cashed the check. She matched it instead, anonymously, and sent both to the hospital. Years later, people still talk about that night. Not because Julia Roberts reclaimed her seat, but because she reclaimed someone's dignity in the process.